Clara had always been a woman of simplicity. Born and raised in a small, quiet town, her life was as unremarkable as one could imagine. A single mother to a bright-eyed boy named Daniel, she worked long hours cleaning offices, her hands calloused from the hard labor. Her world was routine, early mornings, long days, and evenings spent with Daniel, her one true joy. While most of her co-workers seemed to live for their paycheck, Clara had an inner peace. She didn't mind the hard work, it was what she had to do to provide for her son. But deep down, there was a part of her that longed for something more. Clara's small apartment was modest, bare walls, simple furniture, but it was hers. She didn't need much. A small, worn-out piano sat in the corner of the living room, gathering dust. It had been a gift from her late mother, who had always encouraged her to pursue music. But Clara's life had never allowed her the luxury of indulging in her passion. Music was just a distant memory now, a pastime she had abandoned long ago when life demanded more of her time and energy. Her fingers would occasionally hover over the keys, remembering the beautiful melodies she used to play as a child. But as soon as her son's laughter filled the room, those thoughts would fade, replaced by the demands of motherhood. Daniel, at 6 years old, was a curious, energetic child. His world revolved around Clara, and they had a bond like no other. She did her best to shield him from the harsh realities of their financial struggles, though he could tell that something wasn't right. He often asked why they couldn't go out for ice cream like the other kids, or why they didn't have a big house with a backyard. Clara would smile and tell him that they had everything they needed, and that the most important thing was love. Daniel always accepted her answer without question, his innocent smile enough to melt her heart every time. Work was hard. Clara cleaned the offices of a prestigious law firm owned by a man named Mr. Simmons. He was well known in town, wealthy, arrogant, and with a sense of entitlement that seeped into every aspect of his life. He'd never really paid much attention to Clara, except to give her the occasional grunt of approval when she finished her work for the day. To him, she was just another cog in the machine. He rarely even acknowledged her presence, and Clara, for the most part, kept to herself, content to do her job and go home to her son. There were times when she felt like she didn't belong in that world, surrounded by high-priced suits and expensive furniture, but she'd long since accepted that it was simply the way things were. She was a cleaner, a nobody in the eyes of most people. One particular day, however, something changed. Clara had just finished mopping the floors in the main office lobby when Mr. Simmons appeared, his usual smug smile plastered across his face. He had a glint of mischief in his eyes, something she hadn't noticed before. "Clara," he said, as if the very sound of her name was foreign on his lips. "How would you like to attend a party at my house this weekend?" Clara blinked in surprise. A party? She wasn't sure if she had heard him correctly. "I'm sorry, sir, but I don't think I understand." "A party?" "Yes," he said with a chuckle, clearly amused by her confusion. "A small gathering. I thought it would be a nice change of pace for you. You can come and, I don't know, mingle with some of my friends." His voice was dripping with sarcasm, but Clara, ever polite, simply nodded. It wasn't that she was opposed to going to a party, she'd never been invited to one like this before, especially not by someone as influential as Mr. Simmons. But there was something about the way he was speaking that felt off, like he was setting her up for something. Still, she couldn't afford to turn down any opportunity, so she smiled politely and accepted, though a sense of unease crept over her. The days leading up to the event were filled with a strange mixture of anticipation and dread. Clara had never been to a high society party, and the thought of mingling with people she didn't know made her stomach turn. She wasn't sure how she was supposed to behave or what to wear. Her wardrobe consisted mostly of work clothes, slacks and blouses that she'd bought from thrift stores. None of it was fit for a fancy evening at Mr. Simmons's mansion. But she made do, pulling out her one nice dress, the one she wore for special occasions, and trying her best to make it work. It was a simple black dress, nothing extravagant, but it was the best she could do. The night of the party arrived, and Clara found herself standing outside a grand mansion on the edge of town, the lights shining brightly in the distance. Her heart was racing. She almost turned around, convinced she didn't belong. But her son's face flashed in her mind. He was so proud of her for going. He'd told her she was the strongest mom in the world, and if he could see her now, in that fancy dress, maybe he would see her in a new light. Taking a deep breath, she rang the doorbell. The door swung open to reveal Mr. Simmons, dressed in an impeccably tailored suit. He looked surprised for a moment, as though he hadn't expected her to actually show up. But then his smile returned, albeit a little too wide. "Clara. I'm so glad you could make it," he said, his tone not quite matching his expression. He gestured for her to come in, and she stepped into the grand foyer, immediately feeling out of place. The room was filled with polished marble floors, towering ceilings, and expensive artwork lining the walls. The smell of expensive wine and gourmet food filled the air. Clara felt a pang of insecurity as she looked around at the impeccably dressed guests, all of whom seemed to belong in this world. They looked at her as though she was an outsider, and she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being judged. Mr. Simmons introduced her to a few of his friends, all of whom greeted her with polite but dismissive smiles. He seemed to be enjoying himself, as if he were watching a performance. Clara couldn't shake the feeling that she was part of some cruel joke. Still, she kept her composure and tried to make small talk, though she couldn't help but notice how out of place she felt among the well-dressed, high-society crowd. It wasn't long before someone mentioned the piano. "Clara," Mr. Simmons said, with a playful grin, "I hear you used to play piano as a child. Why don't you show us a little something?" The request was casual, but Clara could tell that there was more to it. She was being asked to perform, not because they were genuinely interested in her talent, but because they thought it would be funny. It wasn't a kind invitation. It was part of the prank: get the humble cleaner to play in front of the guests and see how she reacts. Clara felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment. She was just a cleaner, after all. The thought of sitting at that grand piano and playing in front of all these strangers made her stomach churn. "I'm afraid I haven't played in years," Clara said nervously, trying to excuse herself. But Mr. Simmons insisted, practically pushing her toward the piano, his eyes gleaming with amusement. "Don't be shy, Clara," he said. "It'll be fun." And so, with a deep breath and an uncomfortable smile, Clara walked toward the piano, her fingers trembling as she sat down on the bench. The guests gathered around, their whispers filling the air, their eyes fixed on her. She could feel their judgment, their expectation, and she wanted to run. But then, as her fingers hovered above the keys, something inside her clicked. She remembered the music, those melodies that had once filled her life. It had been so long since she'd played, but she knew she couldn't let this moment slip away. With a deep breath, Clara's fingers pressed down on the keys. The first note rang out, clear and pure, and the room fell silent. It was as though the world had paused. The music filled the space, and Clara, for the first time in a long while, felt like herself again. The laughter and whispers of the guests faded away as she lost herself in the music. It was no longer about impressing anyone or playing to their expectations. It was about her, her love for the piano, and the joy of playing once more. The guests watched in stunned silence as Clara played, each note flowing effortlessly from her fingers. They had expected a clumsy performance, a poor woman embarrassing herself. But what they got instead was something far beyond their wildest imagination. Clara wasn't just playing for them, she was playing for herself. Her music spoke of pain, of joy, of everything she had buried deep inside for so many years. The more she played, the more the room seemed to melt away. She was lost in the music, and for the first time, she felt like she truly belonged. As Clara continued to play, the atmosphere in the room began to shift. At first, the guests were taken aback by the unexpected beauty of her music. The once quiet whispers grew into an uncomfortable silence as they listened, not knowing what to do with themselves. Some had initially gathered around the piano to poke fun at her, but now they found themselves entranced by the raw emotion in each note, each chord that Clara played. The melody she weaved was simple yet powerful, and as the piano's keys vibrated through the air, it was clear that Clara was no longer the humble cleaner in their eyes. She had transformed into someone completely different, someone they didn't expect. Her fingers danced across the keys, her long-lost passion shining through in every movement. It wasn't about proving herself anymore, it wasn't about fulfilling some twisted expectation from a room full of strangers. It was about rediscovering a part of herself that had been buried beneath years of hard work, endless sacrifices, and the weight of being invisible. Music was her escape, her sanctuary, a place where the world couldn't touch her. And now, sitting in front of a grand piano in Mr. Simmons's lavish mansion, Clara was living that escape with every breath she took. The guests, who had initially looked at her with condescending smiles and quiet amusement, were now watching in awe, their previous judgment replaced with a sense of reverence. Some even shifted uncomfortably, realizing that they had misjudged her. But Clara was lost in her own world, her eyes closed, her fingers moving with a grace she had long forgotten. For those few moments, Clara was not the cleaner who scrubbed floors and emptied trash cans. She was not the mother struggling to make ends meet, nor was she the woman who had been humiliated by the likes of Mr. Simmons and his friends. She was just a musician, a woman who had found her voice once more. As Clara's song came to an end, the room remained still. The final note hung in the air like a fragile thread, lingering long after the sound had faded. Clara opened her eyes and saw the stunned faces around her. No one moved, no one spoke. It was as if the very essence of the room had been changed. Her chest heaved with a mixture of emotion, exhaustion from the intensity of the music, joy from rediscovering a part of herself, and an odd sense of triumph. She had done it. She had faced her fears and proved something far more important than anything Mr. Simmons or his friends could have ever imagined. She had proven to herself that she still had a voice, that she was not just the sum of the labels the world placed on her. A heavy silence hung in the air for what seemed like an eternity before someone finally dared to break it. It was Mrs. Richards, an elderly woman in her 70s who had been standing near the back of the crowd. Clara had barely noticed her at first, but now, Mrs. Richards stepped forward with a look of genuine admiration in her eyes. "That was beautiful," she said softly, her voice trembling with emotion. "I didn't know you could play like that." The words hit Clara like a wave. She hadn't expected anyone to say anything at all, let alone a compliment so sincere. For a moment, she felt a pang of shame, shame that she hadn't shared this part of herself with anyone before, shame that she had hidden it for so long. But then, as Mrs. Richards' words sank in, Clara felt a warm glow spread through her chest. She hadn't played for approval, but the acknowledgement of her talent, her humanity, felt like a balm on old wounds. One by one, the others began to speak, their voices hesitant at first, unsure of how to respond. But soon, the room was filled with compliments, each one more heartfelt than the last. Clara felt a mix of gratitude and disbelief. These were the people who had once looked down on her, who had regarded her as nothing more than an employee to be taken for granted. But now, they were seeing her for who she truly was, someone with depth, with passion, with a story that deserved to be heard. Mr. Simmons, who had been standing off to the side, his arms crossed and a smug expression on his face, was now staring at Clara with something that bordered on awe. The man who had invited her as part of his little joke now seemed to realize the gravity of what had just happened. He took a step forward, clearing his throat. "Clara," he began, his tone uncharacteristically soft, "I didn't know you had it in you." That was incredible. Clara glanced at him, her expression guarded. She wasn't sure if he was being sincere or if he was still trying to cover up the awkwardness of the situation. But before she could respond, he quickly added, "I'm sorry if I've made you feel uncomfortable. That was not my intention. You truly have a gift." For a moment, Clara felt a flicker of doubt. Was he truly sorry, or was he simply trying to salvage his own reputation in front of his guests? But then, as she looked around at the other guests, she realized that it didn't matter. She had already done something far more significant than anything Mr. Simmons could ever offer her. She had found her voice again. And that, in itself, was enough. As Clara stood up from the piano, she noticed Daniel in the corner of the room, standing quietly with wide eyes. He had been watching her the entire time, and now, his face broke into a beaming smile. Clara's heart swelled with love for him. She walked over to where he was standing, kneeling down to give him a hug. "You were amazing, Mom," Daniel whispered, his eyes filled with pride. Tears welled up in Clara's eyes as she hugged her son tightly. For the first time in years, she felt like she had done something that mattered, not just for herself, but for him. She had shown him that no matter what life threw at them, no matter how hard things got, they could always rise above it. She wasn't just his mother, she was a woman who could defy expectations, who could create beauty in the most unexpected places. As the night wore on, Clara found herself surrounded by people who no longer saw her as a cleaner or a nobody. They saw her for what she truly was, a woman with talent, strength, and a heart full of passion. It wasn't just the music that had changed things, it was her own transformation, her willingness to step into the unknown and face the judgment of others with courage. When it was finally time to leave, Mr. Simmons approached her again, this time with a sincere smile. "Clara," he said, "I'd like to invite you to dinner sometime, if you're interested. I think there's a lot more to you than I ever realized." Clara looked at him, her mind racing. She didn't know what to say. A part of her wanted to accept, to let him see that she wasn't just someone to be taken advantage of. But another part of her knew that she didn't need his approval anymore. She had already proven her worth, both to herself and to the people in that room. "No thank you," she said, her voice steady. "I appreciate the offer, but I think I'll pass." With that, Clara took her son's hand and walked out of the mansion, her heart light, her spirit soaring. The world had underestimated her, but she had proven them wrong. She wasn't just the poor cleaner with a hidden talent. She was so much more. And for the first time in a long time, Clara was ready to step into the world and claim her place in it. The following days were a blur of activity and emotions for Clara. As the shock of the party began to fade, the reality of what had transpired settled in. People she had never imagined would acknowledge her, let alone commend her for her talents, were now looking at her differently. It wasn't just the compliments or the surprised expressions, it was the genuine interest and curiosity. Word had spread through town, and suddenly, Clara wasn't just the cleaner at Mr. Simmons's office anymore. She was a woman with a hidden gift, a secret talent that no one had expected. And as the whispers continued, Clara couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. She had always known there was something inside her that she had kept locked away, but she had never imagined it would come to light in such a dramatic way. At the local cafe, where Clara had often spent her lunch breaks, people were now looking at her with newfound respect. The waitress, who had always been friendly but distant, now greeted her with a warm smile and a compliment about her piano performance. Clara felt her face flush with warmth every time someone mentioned the event. It was a strange sensation, being seen, being acknowledged, but she couldn't help but feel a surge of gratitude. It was a stark contrast to the way things had been before. For so long, she had felt invisible, as if she were simply a fixture in the background of other people's lives. But now, she was at the forefront of the conversation, and she was learning to embrace it. Daniel had noticed the changes too. He had always been proud of his mother, but now, he looked at her with a new kind of awe. She could see it in his eyes every time he spoke to her. His confidence in her had grown, and that gave Clara a sense of purpose she hadn't realized she'd been missing. He had always admired her strength and determination, but now, he saw her as more than just the hard-working, self-sacrificing woman who put food on the table. He saw her as someone who was capable of great things, someone who was more than just her circumstances. But with this newfound attention came a sense of discomfort. Clara had always been a private person, someone who kept her emotions and desires closely guarded. The idea of being the subject of gossip or speculation wasn't something she was used to. She found herself second-guessing every decision, wondering what people were thinking, and questioning whether she had done the right thing by playing the piano in front of those strangers. Yet, deep down, she knew she had made the right choice. That moment, the one where she sat down at that grand piano and allowed herself to be vulnerable, had changed everything for her. It had reminded her that she wasn't just a cleaner. She wasn't just the woman who scrubbed toilets and cleaned offices. She was a woman with dreams, with a voice that deserved to be heard. As the days passed, Clara began to feel the weight of her decision. It wasn't enough to simply play the piano once at a party. She had to do something with it. She had to figure out how to move forward, how to make this part of her life a reality. The question nagged at her constantly, what now? She couldn't keep working as a cleaner forever. She knew that. She had always wanted more, but she had never known how to reach for it. She had spent so many years focused on survival, on getting through the day, that she had lost sight of her own aspirations. Her thoughts often drifted to the idea of taking music lessons, of finding a way to truly hone her skills and see where they could take her. But there was a part of her that felt afraid to take that step. She had never had the luxury of thinking about a career in music, not when she had to worry about paying bills and taking care of her son. The reality of her situation had always kept her grounded, and the idea of pursuing something so uncertain felt daunting. But Clara knew that she couldn't keep putting it off. She had to try, for herself and for Daniel. One evening, as she sat with Daniel at the kitchen table, her mind racing with possibilities, he spoke up, as if sensing her internal struggle. "Mom, why don't you try to get a job as a pianist? Maybe you could play at a restaurant or something. You're really good," he said, his voice filled with hope and encouragement. Clara looked at her son, feeling a lump form in her throat. He had always been her biggest supporter, but hearing him suggest that she take her talent seriously made her realize that it wasn't just about proving something to others. It was about proving something to herself. Daniel believed in her, and that belief gave her the courage to take the first step. The next morning, Clara walked into the local music school, her heart pounding in her chest. She had never considered taking formal lessons, but now, it felt like the right time. The receptionist at the desk greeted her warmly, and after a brief conversation, Clara found herself signing up for a series of piano lessons. The excitement that bubbled inside her was almost overwhelming. For the first time in years, Clara felt like she was doing something for herself, something that would allow her to pursue a dream she had long buried. But even as she began her lessons, Clara knew there would be challenges. She was still a cleaner, still working long hours just to make ends meet. Balancing her job, her son, and her new pursuit of music would be no easy task. But Clara had never been one to shy away from hard work. She had been fighting for a better life for as long as she could remember. And now, this was just another battle she was ready to take on. As weeks passed, Clara's skills improved. Her lessons gave her a new sense of purpose, and each note she played brought her closer to the woman she had always wanted to be. She was no longer just cleaning other people's messes, she was creating something beautiful, something that came from deep within her. She still had moments of doubt, but with each passing day, she felt more confident. She was a pianist, and she wasn't going to let anyone tell her otherwise. But it wasn't just her music that had changed her. The people in her life were also starting to see her differently. Daniel had noticed her newfound energy, her passion for music, and it filled him with pride. He encouraged her to perform at local events, to show the world what she could do. And Clara, though nervous at first, agreed. The idea of playing for an audience was terrifying, but she knew it was the next step. It was time to share her gift with the world. As Clara prepared for her first public performance, she couldn't help but think back to the party at Mr. Simmons's house, the moment that had set everything in motion. It had been the spark, the catalyst that had ignited her desire to pursue something more. And now, as she stood on the cusp of something bigger, she knew that her journey was only just beginning. The night of her first performance arrived, and Clara stood backstage, her heart racing. She was surrounded by a crowd of strangers, some of whom were already seated in the audience, chatting excitedly. She took a deep breath, her fingers trembling as she approached the piano. This was her moment, the culmination of everything she had worked for. As she sat down at the piano and began to play, Clara felt the weight of the world lift off her shoulders. This was her time. And as the music flowed from her fingers, she knew that this was only the beginning of a new chapter in her life. The evening was nothing like Clara had imagined. As she played the first few notes, a sense of calm washed over her, but it was soon replaced with the rush of adrenaline. Her fingers danced across the keys, unsure at first, but slowly finding their rhythm. Each note seemed to make the nervousness dissipate more and more. The audience, many of whom had initially come to see other acts, gradually quieted down. She could feel their eyes on her, but instead of the suffocating pressure she'd feared, she felt something else, a connection. As she played, her mind cleared, and for the first time in years, she was completely in the moment. Clara had always kept a part of herself hidden, her passion for music, her desire to achieve something greater. Life had forced her to prioritize survival, but now, sitting at that piano, she realized how much of herself she had denied. The weight of responsibility, of providing for Daniel, of working tirelessly just to make ends meet, had buried her dreams. But the music, the sound that came from her soul, brought them to life again. It was a reminder of what she was capable of what had always been there, waiting to emerge. As Clara played, the room grew still. She lost herself in the music, weaving each note into a tapestry of emotion and experience. It wasn't just about the technical skill, it was about the heart she poured into each phrase. She wasn't just playing for an audience, she was playing for herself, for the person she had long forgotten, the one who had dreams beyond cleaning offices and washing dishes. Her hands moved with purpose, and her heart raced with the thrill of being seen, truly seen, for the first time in a way that felt authentic and powerful. The applause at the end was deafening. Clara's fingers hovered over the keys, still vibrating with the energy of the performance. She took a deep breath, her body still tingling from the high of it all. As she looked up, she saw the faces in the audience, a mix of surprise, admiration, and awe. They hadn't expected this from her. And yet, Clara realized, that was exactly the point. She hadn't expected it from herself either. But she had done it. She had taken a leap and allowed herself to be vulnerable, to share her talent with the world. And the world had responded. For the first time in years, Clara felt like she belonged somewhere outside of her responsibilities. There was no rush to leave, no need to escape into the routine of life. She had opened a door she never thought she would find. But that moment of validation, the applause, and the sense of connection with the audience, didn't just mean success. It meant transformation. For Clara, it wasn't just about the music, it was about reclaiming the part of her that had been buried for so long. She wasn't just a cleaner. She was a musician, a woman with a purpose, with dreams of her own. And that truth, that revelation, carried with her in the days that followed. The following weeks were a whirlwind of opportunity and change. Clara's performance at the local venue had sparked something in her, something she hadn't expected but welcomed nonetheless. A local music director had approached her after the show, praising her talent and suggesting she audition for a spot at a popular jazz lounge in the city. The offer was both exciting and terrifying. Clara had never imagined that she would be in a position to consider such an opportunity. She had been so focused on surviving, on working hard to support herself and Daniel, that she had forgotten the possibility of thriving, of achieving something that she loved. But there was also the fear of stepping into an unknown world, of putting herself in a position where she might fail. Clara was no stranger to hard work, to the grind of making ends meet, but this was different. This was something that required not just effort but vulnerability. It wasn't something she could control completely, and that uncertainty unsettled her. She had spent years in the shadows, avoiding the spotlight, doing what needed to be done without ever asking for more. The idea of seeking recognition, of pursuing a career in music, felt like stepping into an unfamiliar realm. But despite the fear, Clara found herself unable to ignore the possibility. She wanted to see where it could take her, to allow herself the chance to explore this new path. She had nothing to lose. The decision wasn't easy, but it was clear, this was her moment. With Daniel's encouragement and the support of the few people who had known about her talent, Clara decided to take a leap of faith. She called the music director and set up the audition. As the date approached, Clara found herself practicing more than she had ever practiced before. Her lessons had become more focused, more intentional, as she honed her skills in preparation for the audition. The nerves were still there, but there was a sense of determination that came with each note she played. She wasn't just preparing for a performance, she was preparing for a future, for a life that could be different from anything she had ever known. On the day of the audition, Clara stood before the grand piano at the jazz lounge, her hands trembling as she placed them on the keys. The music director sat at a table nearby, observing her every move. Clara had been here before, at the beginning, when she first sat down at the piano at Mr. Simmons's party. It had felt terrifying then, but now, it felt like a natural progression. This was just another step on the path she had started. And as she began to play, Clara felt a sense of purpose that she hadn't realized she'd been missing. She wasn't just playing for the job. She was playing for herself, for the future that she had always dreamed of but never thought possible. She poured everything she had into the music, each note a reflection of her journey, her struggles, and her triumphs. The audition was over too quickly, but Clara knew she had given it everything she had. She didn't know what the outcome would be, but she was proud of herself. She had taken the chance, stepped out of her comfort zone, and embraced the possibility of something new. For Clara, that was success in itself. Several days later, she received the call from the music director. The news was everything she had hoped for. She had been offered a position at the jazz lounge, starting part-time until she could prove herself. Clara felt as if the weight of the world had been lifted from her shoulders. She had done it. The recognition, the chance to perform professionally, had come, and it had come because she had dared to believe in herself. The validation she had long sought, both from others and from herself, was now within reach. But the journey was far from over. Clara knew that she was only at the beginning of something much bigger. The future was uncertain, but she no longer feared it. With the support of her son, her new friends, and her own inner strength, Clara was ready to take on whatever came next. The music, the life she had longed for, was no longer a distant dream. It was her reality, and she wasn't going to let it slip away. She had transformed not just her career, but her identity, and that transformation had rippled outward, touching everyone who had witnessed her journey. The woman who had once been invisible was now stepping into the light, ready to embrace everything that lay ahead. Clara's world was changing in ways she could barely comprehend. After being offered the position at the jazz lounge, every day felt like a new opportunity, a new chapter. The days blurred into weeks, and Clara was caught in a whirlwind of rehearsals, performances, and managing her responsibilities at home with Daniel. But it was the music that kept her going. Every night after a performance, she would return home, exhausted but exhilarated. The lounge, which had once seemed so foreign and intimidating, now felt like her second home. The small but loyal audience, the cheers, the way people leaned forward in their seats when she began to play, it was all so different from the cold, impersonal offices she had cleaned for years. She was no longer invisible. She wasn't just Clara, the cleaner, she was Clara, the musician. One night, after finishing a particularly challenging set, Clara found herself in the dressing room, her fingers still humming with the vibrations of the piano. She was wiping the sweat from her forehead when the door opened, and in walked Mr. Simmons. He had been at almost every performance since that first night at the party, always sitting in the front row, always offering a kind word or a compliment afterward. He was a man of influence in the community, someone whose presence at the lounge was a silent endorsement. But tonight, he wasn't just there to listen. He had a proposition. "Clara," he began, his tone measured but filled with warmth, "I've been watching you, and I think you've got something special. Something that goes beyond just playing piano. You've got the kind of soul that makes people listen, and I think you could do more than just play in a small lounge. I have some connections with a larger venue in the city. If you're interested, I could help you take your music to a bigger audience. But it's going to take dedication, a lot of work, and most of all, courage." The words hung in the air like a challenge, daring Clara to take them seriously. She could hardly believe what she was hearing. The idea of playing in a bigger venue, to an audience that might be more demanding, more critical, was she ready for that? She had come so far already, but it had been a gradual process. Every step had felt like a small victory, and now, this felt like a giant leap. What if she failed? What if the world didn't want to hear her music? But then Clara thought of Daniel. She thought of the sacrifices she had made for him, of the long hours spent away from him while cleaning, of the moments she had missed in his life, all because she was trying to make sure he had what he needed. This was her chance to show him something more than just survival. This was her chance to show him the beauty of pursuing something you love, even when the odds seem stacked against you. If she could do this, if she could take that leap and show him the importance of taking chances, of reaching for something beyond what the world expected of her, then maybe it would all be worth it. Taking a deep breath, Clara looked up at Mr. Simmons, her voice steady but filled with uncertainty. "I don't know if I'm ready for that. This is all so new to me, and the thought of performing at such a big venue, it scares me. But I know you're right. I've come this far, and if I don't take this chance, I might regret it." Mr. Simmons smiled, as if he had been expecting her hesitation. "That's the first step, Clara. Realizing it's okay to be scared. But it's more important to be brave, to push past that fear and reach for what you truly want. If you want this, I can help you get there. But you have to commit, and you have to give it everything you've got. No half measures." And just like that, Clara's future shifted. It wasn't just about the piano anymore. It was about what she wanted, what she needed for herself. It was about taking a step into the unknown, embracing everything that came with it, even the fear, even the risk of failure. For the first time in her life, Clara wasn't just playing for survival, she was playing for her own joy, her own purpose. And she knew it was worth the risk. The next few weeks were a blur of rehearsals and preparations. Clara worked harder than she ever had before, pouring every ounce of her energy into perfecting her performances. She worked with a vocal coach, who helped her refine her voice for the big stage, and practiced with a band, learning how to blend her piano with their instruments in ways she had never imagined. The pressure was immense, but Clara was no stranger to hard work. She had faced struggles before, raising Daniel as a single mother, working long hours in the cleaning industry, struggling to make ends meet. But now, there was something different. This was for her. As the night of the big performance approached, Clara's nerves began to mount. She couldn't sleep the night before, tossing and turning in her bed, her mind racing with thoughts of the crowd, the stage, and the expectations that had been placed on her. What if she couldn't deliver? What if she messed up in front of all those people? She had worked so hard to get here, and yet, the fear of failure still gnawed at her. But then, she thought of Daniel, asleep in the next room, dreaming his own dreams. She thought of the way he had looked at her after her first performance at the lounge, the pride in his eyes. She couldn't let him down. She couldn't let herself down. She had already come so far, and now, there was no turning back. The night of the performance, Clara stood backstage, her heart pounding in her chest. The venue was larger than anything she had ever imagined. The lights were bright, the crowd seemed to stretch endlessly before her, and the air was thick with anticipation. She could hear the murmur of voices, the clinking of glasses, and the shuffle of feet. This was it. This was the moment that would change everything. When her name was called, Clara took a deep breath and walked out onto the stage. The crowd went silent, their eyes fixed on her. The nerves were still there, but they didn't control her. She was ready. As she sat at the piano, she closed her eyes for a brief moment and let the music flow through her. The first few notes were shaky, but soon, the rhythm took over, and Clara lost herself in the performance. She could feel the energy of the crowd, their appreciation, their connection to the music. She was no longer just a cleaner. She was a woman with a talent, a gift, a story to tell. As she finished her set, the crowd erupted into applause, louder than anything she had ever heard before. Clara's hands trembled, but there was a smile on her face, a smile that said it all. She had done it. She had stepped into the spotlight and shown the world who she was, who she had always been. The fear, the uncertainty, the doubts, they had all been worth it. Backstage, Mr. Simmons greeted her with a proud smile. "You did it, Clara. That was incredible." And in that moment, Clara knew that this was just the beginning. She had proven to herself that she was more than the sum of her struggles, that she was capable of greatness. The road ahead would be long, and there would be more challenges, but Clara was ready. She had stepped into the life she had always dreamed of, and nothing, not even fear, could take that away. Clara's newfound life unfolded with an intensity she hadn't expected. The applause from her first big performance was still ringing in her ears as the days passed, and each night at the lounge seemed to confirm what she'd always known deep down: she was meant to perform. The satisfaction of playing in front of an appreciative audience was nothing compared to the joy that now filled her heart. Each note, each melody she played carried an emotional weight she had never fully understood until now. She was no longer just playing for herself. Her music was for everyone who had ever felt overlooked, invisible, or small. It was for the young, ambitious girl she had once been, dreaming in silence, and for Daniel, who would never have to question whether his mother had a purpose beyond just surviving. But as Clara's reputation began to grow, so did the expectations placed on her. She began performing at larger venues, sometimes even in front of critics who were quick to evaluate her every move. With the success came pressure, the kind she had never faced before. It wasn't just about playing anymore, it was about proving herself over and over again. She began to feel the weight of the expectations bearing down on her, the fear that one wrong note or one bad review could shatter everything she had worked for. The rise to success wasn't easy. Clara found herself caught between the demands of her new career and her life at home. Daniel was growing up quickly, and she wanted to be there for every milestone, every soccer game, every school performance. But the hours at the piano and the late nights at the lounge left her exhausted, and there were moments when she felt like she was losing touch with the very life she had fought so hard to protect. The guilt gnawed at her. Was she doing the right thing? Was the dream worth sacrificing time with her son? It was in one of these moments of self-doubt that Clara found herself alone in the lounge late one evening, sitting at the piano, her hands resting on the keys, but her mind elsewhere. The lounge was quiet, with only the distant hum of the city outside. Clara didn't notice Mr. Simmons walking up to her until he spoke. his voice gentle but filled with purpose. "You're thinking too much," he said. Clara sighed and turned to face him. "I can't help it. I feel like I'm on the verge of losing everything. I thought this would be the dream, but now it feels like it's slipping away. I can't be everywhere at once, and I can't be everything for everyone. I just don't know how to keep it all together." Mr. Simmons looked at her with a quiet understanding, his gaze kind and calm. "Clara, you don't have to do it all. Nobody expects you to. You're an artist, but you're also a mother, and that's just as important. The key is finding balance, and that's something you'll have to define for yourself. You've already proven that you can chase your dreams. Now, it's time to remember what truly matters." His words struck a chord deep within her. She had been so focused on making her dreams come true that she had nearly forgotten the reasons she'd started this journey in the first place: to give Daniel a better life, to show him that dreams were worth chasing, but also to keep their family intact. She needed to stop measuring her worth by the accolades or the applause and remember that the love she had for Daniel was the root of everything. The following weeks were difficult, but Clara slowly began to take control of her life again. She started taking fewer performances and dedicated more time to being with Daniel. She spent evenings with him at the kitchen table, helping with homework or just talking about his day. She attended his school plays, and she cheered from the sidelines at soccer games. The world hadn't stopped turning just because she had found success in her music. She didn't need to be everywhere at once, she just needed to be present when it mattered most. In the midst of all the change, Clara's bond with Daniel grew stronger. He had always looked up to her, but now he saw his mother in a new light. He saw her as a woman who had worked tirelessly for everything she had, and who, despite her success, never stopped loving him with everything she had. And in turn, Daniel began to understand the value of hard work, of perseverance, and of following one's dreams. He began to write his own songs, filling notebooks with lyrics and ideas, and Clara couldn't help but smile at how her passion for music had inspired him. But the road to success was still fraught with challenges. One night, after a particularly intense performance at a renowned concert hall, Clara received a call that would change everything. Her heart skipped a beat as she recognized the number on her phone. It was from a manager of one of the largest music festivals in the country, the one she had been dreaming about for years. Her heart raced as she listened to the message, her breath catching in her throat as she heard the words. "We'd like to offer you a spot at our festival. We believe you're exactly the kind of artist we want to showcase." The offer was both thrilling and terrifying. This was the opportunity she had been waiting for, the chance to perform on a stage that would catapult her to even greater heights. But as she listened to the details, the reality of what this would mean began to sink in. The festival was in another city, and the schedule was tight. It would mean more time away from Daniel, more late nights, more travel. Clara's heart wavered. Could she really do this? Could she leave her family behind again for the sake of her career? She took a moment, letting the weight of the decision settle over her. She looked around at the life she had built, the music, the fame, the love of her son, and realized something profound. The success she had achieved didn't come at the cost of her family, it had come because of it. It was a reflection of her commitment to her passions, yes, but also her unwavering commitment to Daniel, to providing for him and ensuring he had a future. She wasn't leaving her family behind, she was doing this for them. With a renewed sense of clarity, Clara made the decision. She would take the opportunity. But she would also do it on her terms. She would find ways to balance the demands of her career with her love for her son. She wasn't going to sacrifice her family, but she also wasn't going to let her dreams slip away. Clara knew that success wasn't just about the stages she performed on or the crowd she played for, it was about the lives she touched and the legacy she created. As the date for the festival approached, Clara prepared with a mix of excitement and nervous anticipation. But this time, she wasn't doing it alone. Daniel would be there with her every step of the way, supporting her, cheering her on. And no matter what happened on that stage, Clara knew that she had already won. She had found her balance, and that was the greatest success of all. The night of the festival, Clara stood backstage, her heart racing as the lights blazed before her. She had made it. She had overcome every challenge, every obstacle. As the curtain rose, Clara stepped onto the stage, the crowd roaring with applause, and she knew, in that moment, that nothing was impossible. She had chased her dreams, but she had never lost sight of what truly mattered. In the end, that was the most beautiful music of all.